The writer D.H. Lawrence once said, "Never trust the teller, trust the tale." Now, art speaks for itself. It doesn't need the author to explain it away to justify its existence. It's up to the reader, the viewer, or the listener to respond to an artwork and give it meaning. Now, each of us approaches art in a different way, bringing our own interpretation, making our own sense of it. So I think Lawrence was right. Never trust the teller, trust the tale. But I also think it's true that art is in some sense autobiographical, however inaccessible the surface may seem. Art begins with a life. It's created from a history, built from a personal mythology. And life isn't like a CV. It doesn't follow a neat sequence, moving in progressive chunks from A to Z. Life, unlike a CV, is full of all kinds of unexpected events, all kinds of drama that informs us. The connections between art and life and the alternative CV. I'd like to talk today about the process of harnessing the experiences of life and translating them into works of art. The German artist Joseph Beuys had a very interesting history, but most notably, he was shot down during World War II in 1944 over the Crimea. He claimed that he was rescued by a group of nomadic tribespeople. They covered him in animal fat and wrapped him in felt. That nursed him back to health. That experience and those materials was central to the development of his work over the next 40 years. The crash became part of a mythology of self-invention. It made him the artist that he became. The Japanese artist Onkawara really blurred the lines between art and life by recording it daily in type. From 1966 until his death this year at the age of 81, he painted the day's date on these regularly sized canvases as part of over 26,000 works of art, including telegrams sent regularly for many years to friends that simply read, "I am still alive." This is Sophie Calle, a French artist. Her work deals with vulnerability, identity, and intimacy. She once had herself followed by a detective to prove that she existed. When she was dumped by a boyfriend, he dumped her by email. She distributed this to dozens and dozens of women and asked them to respond, and then displayed the responses in an exhibition. And of course, the exhibition was named after the last line of the breakup email, "Take care of yourself." Now, artist mythologies, their life histories turned into art. Now, I'm no exception. My story certainly informs my work. Now, I grew up in a gritty industrial city in England, and though I wasn't one of them, God put me with the gangsters. I spent my youth running around public housing estates and joyriding in stolen cars and trying to avoid mobs of football hooligans. When I was 21, my brother was stabbed, my best friend was beaten almost to death, and my other best friend was actually shot and killed. So I guess the universe was trying to tell me something. So with no money, no education, I left England. And it's only recently I've started to understand what role that history has played in the development of my work as an artist. The truth is it informs and fuels everything that I do. And it's not a question of intention, of deliberately trying to explain or describe the experiences of life. It's more like a gravitational pull that happens inadvertently. I think an artist is someone who's successful of creating a space for the past to be reworked. The poet W.B. Yeats called it a circus. I don't paint sunny landscapes. I don't paint colorful dots. I paint the human body. I paint life, raw, loved and unloved, thrashing and twisting, falling, flying, arms outstretched, trying to protect ourselves from this future barreling inevitably towards us. And it's funny, growing up in that environment, it didn't only inform my work, it gave me a lot of practical skills that are very useful to me now. How to innovate with limited means, how to adapt to new environments, how to negotiate under pressure. All very valuable parts of my alternative CV. Now, when I left England, I did all kinds of odd jobs in odd countries, and I eventually arrived in Hong Kong in 1997, just as the British were leaving. I got a job as a labourer on the Chiang Mai Bridge. I was an abseiler, so I was ascending and descending daily. And when the weather was bad, we didn't have to work, so that allowed me time to develop my practice as a painter. Now, this is like the one consistent passion I'd had since a child. Now, back then, there weren't any opportunities to exhibit in Hong Kong, certainly not for someone who wasn't Chinese and someone who didn't have a formal CV. But that didn't stop me. I just started staging my own exhibitions, innovating with limited means. And I didn't sell a thing for many, many years. But eventually, people did buy. And because my work is figurative paintings of my friends, I'd get a lot of people who would commission me to do their portraits too. Now, working outside of any formal art structure or system, project managing and building the exhibitions and getting attention for them, I was really utilizing my sort of unorthodox CV. And probably the most important part of that was actually working on the bridge. Working on the bridge, it taught me about collaboration, because I was part of a team, but it also taught me about labor, about how much energy is equal to a full day's work. Manual labor, it might seem repetitive or boring, it provided me with like an energy benchmark that I still use today. I really know how to work, and I'm very, very productive. Now, as I became more successful, I started to make some money, and with that money, I started to fund non-commercial experiments, video art, installations, sculptures, I missed one. And it also brought me in touch with lots of people that I could collaborate with, other artists and designers, filmmakers. And we worked on all kinds of odd projects together for absolutely no reward and very little art world recognition or review. But, we didn't really care. We were just like-minded people trying to make beautiful things and share them with the world, completely reckless and naive. But we certainly felt that we were pioneers, in a city with a very limited art platform. I guess we just kind of created our own. Now, this is all going very well, and the projects kept expanding. I suddenly was in a position where I was working with an amazing gallery. I won, there was a new art prize in Asia, and I won it. And I fell in love with a beautiful girl. So, of course, something had to go wrong. In 2008, I was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer, and I was given 6 months to live. Now, after the initial shock, of reviewing these PET scans and realizing that I was stuck with this thing, I made a choice to hit this thing as hard as possible from every angle and make it the most positive adventure of my life, just in case it was going to be my last. I treated it like any other project to be managed, the most focused problem-solving project of my life, the ultimate exercise in commitment, with one goal, to survive. So I did a lot of research, obviously in Western medicine, Chinese medicine, alternative therapy, nutrition. I didn't want to leave my fate into the hands of the oncologists. I wanted to take responsibility for my illness. Whatever the small percentage chance of survival was, I planned on being in that percentage. I also shamelessly dragged all my friends into the process, and I made it very clear to them that if I died, it'd be their bloody fault. Now, off we went on this adventure, and of course it wasn't all fun and games. Chemotherapy and radiotherapy are really no joke. But here I am 6 years later. I survived. And Thank you. I mean, it's a good job I didn't die anyway, to be honest. It would have been such a hassle to everybody. You know, my friends find me extremely annoying. You know, I think if I dropped dead, it would have just been one drama too many. Anyway, the illness and the medical process, survival, these are all really valuable new parts of my alternative CV. You know, it really led me to a new phase of work. You know, nothing is as motivating as a second chance. And it led me to a book, not the Bible. It led me to Joseph Campbell's work on the hero myth. The Hero of 1,000 Faces. Now, in the book, Campbell describes a structure that appears in many stories that we're all familiar with. An individual comes from the ordinary world, and though resistant, eventually embarks on a great adventure, meets allies and enemies, and there are tasks and hurdles to deal with, and eventually some huge challenge that they overcome, and they're rewarded, or there's a gift that they pass on. Now, I'm no hero, but in some respects, I felt certain aspects of that structure related to my life, coming from working class England to this Hong Kong wonderland, meeting friends, and obviously with my illness, overcoming this great battle. So of course, great material for an exhibition. So that's what I did. I built an enormous 20,000 square foot art installation. Completely immersive, and it was called Hope and Glory. And it followed the hero myth structure. So when you entered the show, there was an enormous star, which is like the call to the adventure. And then you kind of fell into the abyss through the darkness, and you came across allies and enemies. And there were hurdles and tasks and mysteries, problems to solve, ascent and descent, metamorphosis, and a neon landscape, you know, that we're all so familiar with in Hong Kong. So these were the myths of my life played out in steel and light and film for the audience to wander through. Now, the building of the project was in some ways a hero myth as well. You know, space is a huge problem in Hong Kong. We don't have a contemporary art museum. So finding a space, that was a task. Convincing the owners to let us use the space, a tremendously difficult thing to do. And then, finding allies, forging a network of collaborators, incredibly generous people that gave all their time and energy to help build this thing and realize it certainly wasn't a one-man show. And of course, there were enemies, there were battles with bureaucracy, of course, the government, who promised us a big grant and then cut it. But of course, eventually we realized the project, we delivered it, and it was a reward in itself. It was a gift. We passed it on to the community. It was a non-profit project. There was no income. It was free entry. So there you go. That's innovating with limited means, collaboration, labor, survival, creation. That's an alternative CV activated in a self-made city with a very peculiar history, a sort of creative place between. Now, I think what one does when one makes art is one presents a personal mythology. Now, mine comes from car crashes and monsters and spaceships and beauty and violence and survival. All the things that have informed and inspired me, and they turn up in every frame of film that I make and in every brushstroke on every painting. Now, we all have a mythology, it's just the color and the flavor are very different, as is how we choose to translate an action upon it. Now, yours may come from your experience of poverty, or wealth, or disability, or gender, or race, or your failures that are, of course, more important than your successes. But whatever your mythology is, you can't change it. So you should own it. And maybe you should do something with it. I mean, that's all I do. I take what I have of value, which is my hand, my vision, and my experience, And with my limited abilities, I express that visually. I'm very lucky. I didn't have an education or a rich family or a stable day job. I just took what I had and made the most out of it. I turned it into art. Now, I never really knew what I wanted to do in life, other than to live creatively and with adventure and work out things myself through experience. And my work is a way to translate, interpret, and understand what I've experienced. It's a very simple act, but it means something to me. It's the most engaging and difficult pursuit I've ever experienced. I'm destroyed and saved regularly. And progress is only really made by labor, by endless hours in the studio, whether I'm in the mood or not, often failing and making mistakes. But as the artist Chuck Close once said, amateurs look for inspiration, and the rest of us just get up and go to work. Now, my life remains remarkably fragile, personally and professionally. But I'm lucky, I really love what I do, and I know that I'm alive. Most people don't know who I am or what I do or how I do it. But it's not really about being on top of the world. It's about being on top of your world. Now, the connection between art and life, this alternative CV, it's such powerful material that we all have if we choose to use it. These pebbles thrown into the rivers of our lives that create ripples inside us and beyond us. How we deal with these ripples, these misfortunes or disadvantages, is perhaps the most powerful indication of who we are, how we innovate, how we adapt, how we overcome. Believe it or not, I get asked a lot for advice, especially from young creative people. I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. But I usually give the same answer, which is don't take advice from me. Work it out for yourself. If you want to know what's at the top of the tree, climb it and find out. Because that's the first step in creating your own mythology. And I certainly look forward to seeing what you do with it. And I can certainly say this, I've only just started creating my own. Thank you very much.